The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're going to love it.
Okay, let's go.
Dr. Anthony Fauci testified today before a House committee looking into the origins of COVID, and it went about exactly as you thought it would. Here's some of the greatest or worst hits, depending on how you look at it.
Americans were aggressively bullied, shamed, and silenced for merely questioning or debating issues such as social distancing, masks, vaccines.
All right, let me jump in. The bell tolls for thee, Anthony Fauci. All right, really quick. I wanted to jump in, explain. Well, you know what? I don't know, actually. Gosh, every time I'm like, I'm sure you've seen, and then I talk to like 6 people, and they're like, no, what are you talking about? Anyway, Dr. Fauci was brought in front of a congressional committee, and it was like the Tom Brady roast, and here is the Nikki Glazer of Congress.
Mr. Fauci, because you're not doctor, you're Mr. Fauci in my few minutes. We should be writing a criminal referral because you should be prosecuted for crimes against humanity. You belong in prison.
All right, so that was Marjorie Taylor Greene. Man, she is rough around the edges. But you know what? Listen, judging the take. I liked that take of hers. Anyway, it was a heated discussion. I'm going to play a little bit and talk about things and honestly let you decide who you think was appropriate and who you think was not. Let you decide what you think is the case with Dr. Fauci. I will say this, it absolutely lined up on partisan lines, meaning all the Democrats supported Dr. Fauci, all the Republicans, I mean, literally to a person, basically had visceral hate for him. So here's an example of Democratic support from Jamie Raskin from Maryland.
They're treating you, Dr. Fauci, like a convicted felon. Actually, you probably wish they were treating you like a convicted felon. They treat convicted felons with love and admiration.
So again, I'm gonna make this point in a second, but that was Democrat Jamie Raskin from Maryland, and here's Republican Jim Jordan from Ohio, the great state of Ohio.
Do you agree that there was a push to downplay the lab leak theory?
Not on my part.
Really?
Really?
Wow.
Wow.
I think most of the country would find that amazing. I still got 11 seconds.
But look at the facts. I've kept an open mind throughout the entire process.
All right, I yield back.
I definitely do not think Dr. Fauci kept an open mind throughout that entire process. And I'm going to play some more stuff on this, but I will say, I want to make this point because it's an important one. It actually is a really important one. I don't understand, and it's really incredible to me that every single Democrat supports Dr. Fauci and every single Republican hates Dr. Fauci. So now, again, I'm not going to even pass judgment on that, and I'm not even going to really fall into one of the camps. What I'm going to say is, isn't that interesting? I mean, honestly, how is it that every single one of the Democrats support him and every single one of the Republicans basically do not support him? How's that possible? There is no way that all of those human beings think alike. So obviously, this becomes a party issue on partisan lines. It's kind of, well, I wouldn't say it's like the Israel-Gaza thing totally right now, because in the Israel-Gaza situation, I will say this. Well, no. I can't even say every single Republican supports Israel, because Thomas Massie and Rand Paul do not. And then I can't say all the Democrats are critical of Israel, because John Fetterman is a Democrat and he completely is not critical and not supportive of, let's say, the humanitarian cause on the Palestinian side. So that one doesn't have the unilateral support from both sides. I'm trying to think Ukraine, Russia. In the Ukraine-Russia situation, this one is Democrats support funding of Ukraine and that side, and then the Republicans are against that. But again, I don't think it's a all or nothing situation. The only one that's really, it's not all or nothing situation. The only one that's really been all or nothing is this COVID discussion.
What a hypocrisy this picture shows. Here you are without your mask, with empty seats everywhere. Remember the cardboard cutout fans? That was one of the most insulting things to Americans, having to watch the games from home, where you got to go and enjoy the game and sit right next to people not following the 6 feet of distancing, not wearing your mask, and everyone else was forced to stay home and stop enjoying life. And your science is displayed.
All right, so I'm playing again the Marjorie Taylor Greene portion where she had her 5 minutes. You know, she is a classic case to me of, I'll be totally honest, I completely agree with the content of what she talks about in this. She showed a picture of Dr. Fauci at a baseball game. You guys probably will remember this, where literally, like, he doesn't have a mask on. He's surrounded by 4 or 5 of his friends. They have masks on. And then there's nobody, within any of the other seats because people weren't allowed. So he went to the game with his friends, didn't wear a mask, or at least the mask was off at that point in the picture. I mean, again, maybe he had just taken it off for whatever reason. Honestly, I don't know that. But regardless, anyway, that picture kind of was super popular years back. But what I wanted to say on Marjorie Taylor Greene is, she's a classic case of just somebody that she's her own worst enemy, because even when she has good points and solid takes, she just does it in such a, irritating, demeaning fashion that, to me, it loses, not that it loses effectiveness, but it loses the power that it could have if she articulated it properly. These guys get so, and women get so visceral that they become, again, their own worst enemy, and they could have a much more effective and probably powerful message if they said it properly. That's why, whether you like him or you don't like him, I mean, Obama is an amazing orator. He's an amazing public speaker, and he increases the effectiveness of his rhetoric sometimes because he says it well. He really does. All right, let's listen to a little more of MJT, and then we're going to move on.
In today's House Select Committee on the coronavirus hearing, Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene questioned Dr. Anthony Fauci on his role during the pandemic. Greene challenged Fauci's previous statements about representing science, criticized his involvement in scientific experiments on animals, and accused him of creating COVID-19 guidelines that she claimed lacked scientific basis. She also brought up allegations of Fauci profiting from pharmaceutical royalties and called for his prosecution, leading to a debate on decorum within the committee. Despite interruptions, Greene continued her criticism, citing what she saw as hypocrisy in Fauci's actions during the pandemic, such as attending a baseball game without a mask while Americans were under strict lockdowns. The hearing highlighted significant disagreements over the government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic.
See, there's a perfect example. That random dude on TikTok summed it up a lot better than Marjorie Taylor Greene did, and his message was more effective. And that guy had a really nice voice. So I'm going to play a few more things, but, with Dr. Fauci, he just always falls back on the science. And he kind of reminds me of Piers Morgan sometimes. He's so condescending, and he thinks he's the smartest guy in the room at all times. And he really does talk down to people, and he really always makes it about the science. And the reason why is,
So if they get up and criticize science, nobody's going to know what they're talking about. But if they get up and really aim at Tony Fauci, well, people could recognize there's a person there, there's a face, there's a voice you can recognize, you see him on television. So it's easy to criticize, but they're really criticizing science because I represent science.
was like the end should have been at the beginning. I represent science. That's his fallback. That really is his fallback, and that's his defense mechanism.
Now recognize Dr. McCormick for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Dr. Wenstrup, Chairman. It's been insinuated that politicians, only bloggers, only conspiracy theorists are disagreeing with you. I want to point out that I'm probably the only member of Congress that actually treated patients during the pandemic from the very beginning to the very end of the pandemic, during night shifts in the ER. Thousands of patients during that time. And in 2020, I was censored. My medical license was threatened because I disagreed with bureaucrats.
All right, we flip back to Republican. This is Dr. Richard McCormick from Georgia, and he is very interesting because I think he brings a different level of credibility than anyone else in Congress because he was an emergency room physician attending to sick people during COVID.
As a person who is treating patients with leading-edge technologies, developing theories, but doing my very best, but being censored by the United States government for the first time, stepping in and taking the place of medical professionals as the experts in healthcare. Any dissent surrounding COVID-19 treatments, mask mandates, and any public policy surrounding the pandemic was immediately labeled as anti-science.
All right, so think back. I mean, that's totally true. It absolutely was. Anything against COVID, the vaccine, even wearing a mask or not wearing a mask. And by mask, it could be a dirty, ripped bandana that qualified as a mask. Remember, everything that kind of, in my opinion, was critical thinking and common sense back then really was labeled anti-science, and it was labeled you're a conspiracy theorist.
I watched as public health officials and politicians told my patients what treatment options were best for them, regardless of their comorbidities or their medical history.
All right, the absolute key to all this was comorbidities and medical history. Now, again, I want to make sure, and I've said this 100 times when I've talked about COVID, actually every time that I've talked about COVID, because I got COVID in July of 2021, and it kicked my ass. It absolutely kicked my ass. I lost 15 pounds. I was out of commission for a week for sure. Probably took me 3 weeks to get back to normal. I had 3 of those nights where I was hallucinating. I thought daytime was nighttime was daytime. I thought we were getting invaded by China. I thought that the Chinese had blocked out the sun because I was looking out my window at night, but I thought it was daytime. I'm not kidding. It got wild in that brain of Ray D. God, I wish I had a podcast back then. That would have been cool to talk about all that stuff.
Despite my education and my training and my experience, my opinions were relegated to conspiracy and misinformation by so-called healthcare experts who had never treated a patient throughout the entire pandemic. This has been a black eye on the medicine and has highlighted why government should never insert itself in between patients and their healthcare providers. The American people deserve to make medical decisions through conversations with their physicians rather than politically motivated mandates.
All right, again, I mean, calling a spade, it was that. Come on, you have to agree. It absolutely was that. It was politically motivated decisions. And again, here's the bottom line. The bottom line is the Democrats supported that. The Republicans did not. The Democrats won the election. The Republicans did not.
Dr. Fauci, did you ever treat a patient for COVID during the pandemic?
I was part of a team that was at the NIH that took care. We didn't take care of many of them.
Okay, so not hands-on. Got it. Thank you.
That was huge. That was a huge question. He literally never treated a patient hands-on. Think about that. Seriously, think about that.
Why would I be criticized by a bureaucrat for doing my very best as a healthcare? This is a rhetorical question. But why? Why would the government, who's never treated a patient for COVID, you can read all the things you want, but you're not there. You're not seeing patients. You're not watching people die, intubating patients right there with that disease in your face, watching it happen. watching the development of this disease and actually learning from it. But I'm being told by bureaucrats what's right and wrong. And what's funny is everything I was censored on, I was proven to be right. Pretty crazy, isn't it?
All right, so for those of you shaking your head right now, saying, man, my boy Ray D has lost it on this one, here is what I personally think the most important part of the entire hearing and the most important part of what Dr. McCormick said.
You said in an interview that you gave as part of an audiobook written by Michael Spector that you believed an institutional should make it hard for people to live their lives so they'd feel pressured to get vaccinated. Could we run the audio clip on that, please?
You think can be done about it? I have to say that I don't see a big solution other than some sort of mandatory vaccination. I know federal officials don't like to use that term.
All right, so I went back and looked at this audiobook just to make sure this was legit, and it absolutely was legit. So pay attention to Dr. Fauci's answer.
Once people feel empowered and protected legally, you are going to have schools, universities, and colleges are going to say, you want to come to this college, buddy? You're going to get vaccinated. Lady, you're going to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
Big corporations like Amazon and Facebook and all of those others are going to say, you want to work for us, you get vaccinated.
The most damning part about that statement was when he says, you want to come work for us, buddy? You know, when he puts the word buddy in there, or he says, you want to whatever lady, you know what I mean? Those words are critical because those words, to me, they prove malicious intent almost.
You want to come to this college, buddy? You're going to get vaccinated. Lady, you're going to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
Big corporations like Amazon and Facebook and all of those others are going to say, you want to work for us, you get vaccinated.
I mean, that's like insane. He said that on an audiobook. It's like, it'd be one thing if he got caught on a hot mic, but man, this guy, he is super, super cocky. All right, listen to this part. This is huge.
And it's been proven that when you make it difficult for people in their lives, they lose their ideological bullshit and they get vaccinated.
When you make it difficult for people in their lives, they lose their ideological bullshit and they get vaccinated. What?
Are all objections to COVID vaccinations ideological bullshit, Dr. Fauci?
No, they're not, and
Thank
that's
you.
not what I was referring to.
Well,
That's a lie. I listened to the entire clip. That's exactly what he was referring to.
in reference to making it hard for people to get education, traveling, working, I'd say it very much was in context. And I take great offense to this. Miss Allison Williams testified before this committee about losing her job because she sought an exemption for ESPN's vaccine mandate, which came from recommendations from bureaucrats like yourself. She and her husband were actively working with a fertility expert, a physician, on how to get pregnant, and agreed with the premise that she was young, healthy, wanted to get pregnant, and shouldn't get the vaccination for medical purposes. But she was fired because you made it hard, just like you said in your statement, because you didn't want to make sure that the ideological bullshit got in the way of her working, of living her life, of making a medical decision with her healthcare professional. I think America should take great offense to this.
I literally had no idea who this Dr. McCormick congressman was, but, I think he really did a nice job with this. And more importantly, you see how much more effective this form of communication is than the way Marjorie Taylor Greene did it?
That's exactly what you meant when you said making it hard for people to live without getting a vaccination. You affected people's ability to work, travel, be educated, to actually flourish in American society, to self-determine, as we're all given God-given rights. Shame on you.
Again, I'd ask you to remove your partisan hat or whatever, and just think about it. I mean, that's all true. It really did affect our day-to-day lives. This was, I've said it before. This is why you're listening to this podcast. It's why I started this podcast. It's why I have gone down this I don't know, awakening critical thinking path. It's why I wrote the book. It's why I've done everything, is because my day-to-day life was affected. And that was strange to me. That really was strange to me, living up and growing up in the United States, coming from Iran, where, I expected that maybe in Iran, but I never expected that in the United States of America.
Dr. Fauci, you've become Dr. Fear. Americans do not hate science. I don't hate science. The American people hate having their freedoms taken from them. You inspired and created fear through mask mandates, school closures, vaccine mandates that have destroyed the American people's trust in our public health institutions. This fear you created will continue to have ripple effects over generations to come. You have already seen its effects in education, in the economy, and everything else. Quite frankly, you said, if you disagree with me, you disagree with science. Dr. Fauci, I disagree with you because I disagree with fear. And with that, I yield.
I mean, that was pretty good. That really was. That entire segment from Dr. McCormick, I think he delivered his message in a calm and cool manner that was effective. But most importantly, it was that audiobook. It was that clip from the audiobook. It was very sinister, his opinion on things, Dr. Fauci, that is. And so the other thing and the other segments of the clips I want to play for you guys really dealt with two things. One is the concept of transmission of COVID if you get the vaccine, which, if you guys remember, initially it was get the vaccine and you will not transmit COVID. You're doing it for your neighbor. You're doing it for your grandmother. That was such a big push under that theme. And then the second one was the constant dismissal of the possibility of a leak from the Wuhan lab. I mean, it's called the Wuhan lab. And it was called the Wuhan virus. I can't take credit for that. That was a Jon Stewart bit on Stephen Colbert.
Dr. Anthony Fauci faced a grilling on the origins of the COVID pandemic Monday.
Did the COVID vaccine stop transmission of the virus?
That is a complicated issue.
Some Republicans on the panel accuse Fauci of helping start the pandemic by giving research grants to a group that helped fund scientists at a coronavirus lab in Wuhan, China, the city where the outbreak began. 4 U.S. agencies and the National Intelligence Council believe the virus came from the nearby market that sold animals, but 2 agencies say it could have leaked from the lab. Some Republicans claim Fauci was not honest about U.S. involvement in the research funding, while House Democrats call it a GOP smear campaign.
Republicans have continued to distort testimony to fan the flames of baseless theories that he caused the COVID-19 pandemic.
Republicans on the subcommittee also questioned whether there was evidence that social distancing worked to stop the spread of COVID.
Distancing made sense, but the 6 feet was arbitrary.
6 foot was chosen in order to create that measurement for social distancing that was easy for people to follow.
Yeah, that 6 foot thing was ridiculous. I'll tell you my funnest COVID stuff was when I would go to a restaurant and I would stand up and the waiter would look at me and I would start walking to the bathroom and they would stop me and say, I have to put my mask on. I don't know if this happened all across the country, but this definitely happened in Los Angeles. And so I would put my mask on, I would come back, and then as soon as I sat down, I was allowed to take my mask off. There was another comedian that did a bit where it's COVID knows. COVID knows. Oh, you're sitting down? COVID's cool with you. It's not going to mess with you. You stand up? COVID knows. COVID knows it's time for you to put on that mask or it's coming for you. You start walking, you better have that mask on. You sit down, though. Yeah, you can take it off. COVID's cool with that. It's pretty funny. I don't think I did it justice there, but that was a funny bit. Anyway, that talked a little bit about, the other thing was that 6 foot social distancing, all that. Where's the science to that? Why 6 feet? Obviously, per that explanation, it seems like they chose something that I guess would be easy to implement. So, okay, I'll accept that. That makes sense. But they should have said that. They should have said, hey, we're choosing 6 feet. It's a little bit arbitrary. We know, but you know what? I think everybody could measure out 6 feet, and this gives us the safety we're looking for. Now, why is it not 7 feet? Why is it not 5 feet? we're not going to explain that. But even that, again, I mean, there was no necessarily rhyme or reason to it, nor any explanation given.
Now recognize Mr. Jordan from Ohio for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doctor, why was it so important that the virus not have started in a lab?
All right, so this is Jim Jordan from Ohio. He's been a critic and very critical of Fauci for years now. He is like living in Fauci's head rent-free. So now he really gets into the lab leak stuff.
We don't know where it started, and that's the reason why I keep an open mind. So I don't know what you mean by why was it so important. It wasn't important.
Well, you still don't know where it started?
If you think this thing started in that wet market, oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to have a talk with you, my fine furry friend. This thing started in that lab. Watch the South Park episode. You can learn. Actually, the South Park pandemic special episode is like unbelievable.
The guys you gave money to figured it out in 3 days.
No.
Mr. Anderson said on January 31st, 2020, virus looks engineered, virus not consistent with evolutionary theory. The very next day, Dr. Gary said, I don't know how this happens in nature. It'd be easy to do in a lab. And then 3 days later, Shazam, they switch and say it has to be nature. So they figured it out in 3 days, but you still don't know?
No, in fact, if you look at what they were saying, Congressman Jordan, they were saying that it was not a manufactured virus. It still could have evolved out of a lab.
Well, let me read something here to you.
They're not incompatible.
In our study on the censorship of the Biden administration working with big tech, I want to read you a WhatsApp message from Mark Zuckerberg. Can we include that the White House put pressure on us to censor the lab leak theory? So this is a communication on...
Okay, this is pretty wild. Listen to this again.
Tech. I want to read you a WhatsApp message from Mark Zuckerberg. Can we include...
Wait a minute. Isn't WhatsApp supposed to be close-ended and you're not supposed to be able to get access to, it's supposed to be encrypted and close-ended and you're not supposed to be able to get access to your messages there or anyone's messages there? Well, look at this.
July 16th, 2021, Nick Clegg, Joel Kaplan, Sheryl Sandberg, Mark Zuckerberg. They're certainly feeling the pressure to downplay any lab leak theory and go with the natural origin theory.
So somehow that committee got access to the private WhatsApp messages of the top brass of Facebook. Anyway, that just shows you what they can get with your WhatsApp messages.
Is there a question there?
One's coming. Here's another email to Mark Zuckerberg. It says, subject line, COVID misinformation, Wuhan lab leak theory. In response to continued public pressure and tense conversations with the new administration, we started removing 5 COVID claims, including the lab leak theory. Mr. Zuckerberg responds, this seems like a good reminder that when we compromise our standards due to pressure from an administration in either direction, we often later regret it.
That's actually interesting in retrospect to hear Mark Zuckerberg even have that opinion, because obviously he's taken a lot of heat for all the censorship that he did. But that's interesting that he even, kind of regretted it or had remorse or really didn't want to do it. But obviously he bowed to pressure, like we talked about in the previous episode where Vivek talked about his conversation with him at the UFC fight.
Why was it so important the virus not have started in a lab?
Wasn't so important that the virus not. We don't know. We know
it was important to someone in the Biden administration, so much so that the top people at Meta, the top people at Facebook are asking, why are we getting all this pressure to downplay the lab leak theory? And we have an email from June of the same year, June 4th, 2021, saying the same thing. It was certainly important to somebody.
I mean, that is a really good point. Obviously, the administration was putting pressure on Facebook to censor and remove any talk of the lab leak theory.
Well, what has that got to do with me?
I'm asking you because you're the expert on the coronavirus. I'm saying, why was the administration so pushing not to have the lab leak theory as something that was viable?
I can answer that. I've kept an open mind throughout the entire process.
You kept an open mind. Dr. Fauci, open mind.
That is correct.
I'd love to hear from everybody. Do you think Dr. Fauci kept an open mind during that process? Do you think he handled everything appropriately? Do you think there was anything nefarious? Or do you think maybe he made some mistakes, honest mistakes? Or do you think there was nefariousness? Nefarious. I like that word.
What happened in those 3 days? Why did Dr. Anderson and Mr. Anderson and Dr. Gary, why did they change their mind in 180 degrees? Because what Christian Anderson says 3 days later, after he said virus looks engineered, virus not consistent with evolutionary theory, 3 days later he says the main crackpot theories going around at the moment relate to this virus being somehow engineered, and that is demonstrably false. How did they figure all that out in 3 days, Dr. Fauci?
You can do that.
You still have an open mind.
Well, what they did is that they testified before this committee. What they did, they went back and looked at the sequences and realized that their initial concern was unfounded about that, and it did not look at all like it was manufactured. But as they said in their paper, even though they feel it was more likely...
3 days, they figured it out.
That's exactly. You could do that in 3 days. You can scan sequences in a day. You don't need 3 days.
All right, I'm calling BS on that. If you can scan it in a day, that's what they did. They scanned it originally, and they came up with their original thesis of it being in a lab, and then they got the screws put to them, and so they revised their point. That's BS. Yeah, that's total BS.
Okay, who's Robert Redfield?
The former director of the CDC.
Dr. Redfield, right? And he was also in the coronavirus task force. Is that accurate?
All right, this is where it gets really interesting because Dr. Redfield was the director of the CDC.
He was a member of the coronavirus task force.
And here's what he said to this committee. He said, Redfield said that Fauci and Collins left him out because Redfield suspected that coronavirus had leaked from the Chinese lab. Is that accurate?
Well, he said that, but that's not true.
Now, remember, Dr. Redfield got fired soon after saying that.
That is incorrect, Congressman.
Dr. Redfield's lying to the committee when he sat right where you sat?
When he said that I kept him out, that is an incorrect statement. The roster who was on the phone...
Was Dr. Redfield in that conference call on February 1st when you had Mr. Anderson and Dr. Gary on that call?
He was not. And the conference call was put together by Jeremy Farrar. So no one kept him out. He said he was kept out because felt...
Did U.S. tax dollars...
You want me to answer the question?
Yeah, I would just wonder why he wasn't on the call. It seems to me the head of CDC, part of the coronavirus task force, which was formed 2 days prior to that call, would have been on the call.
That's an excellent point. The head of the CDC, why is he not on that call?
Well, the call was arranged by Jeremy Farrar. You should ask him.
Okay. Did U.S. tax dollars flow through a grant recipient to the lab in China?
All right, this is also really interesting, and it involves a third party called EcoHealth, which incredibly, I posted something like this on Facebook literally in like May, maybe even April of 2020. I got to go back and find it.
I'm sorry, what was...
Did U.S. tax dollars flow through a grant recipient to the lab in China?
Yes, of course. It was a sub-award to the Wuhan Institute.
And who approved that award?
Excuse me?
And who approved that award? What agency approved that award?
National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases.
Your agency approved that, right?
Yes, it did after.
All right, so in case you're missing this, because it is a little bit complicated, so the NIACH, I might have messed up the initials, but that's the organization that Dr. Fauci headed up, and then they gave grant money to this organization called EcoHealth out of the U.S., EcoHealth then gave that grant money to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, okay? So that grant money really came from the United States through EcoHealth, like an intermediary, similar to how U.S. proxy wars Ukraine, no kidding, seriously, and basically, from there, EcoHealth gives it to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and that's the lab that was right across the street from the supposed wet market where they claimed the bat bit a pangolin and then bit some dude in his butt or something, and then that caused the coronavirus to spread across the world. Dude, I mean, seriously, when you say it out loud, it sounds so ridiculous.
Does that have anything to do with this downplaying of the lab leak theory?
No.
Nothing to do with it?
Nothing.
What do you agree that there was a push to downplay the lab leak theory?
Not on my part.
Really?
Really?
Wow. I think most of the country would find that amazing. I still got 11 seconds.
But look at the facts. I've kept an open mind throughout the entire process.
All right, I yield back.
All right. Jim Jordan is actually normally better than that. I thought he was okay there. I didn't think he was great, but I'll tell you, Dr. McCormick definitely was. Oh my God, we're almost at 35 minutes with this. I had so much other stuff I wanted to cover, but you know what? I'm just going to leave it at that. Anyway, I would be very open to other people's thoughts on this, very open to what you feel about that whole situation now that we are 4 years removed and, God, I can't even believe that, 2 years removed from, let's say the craziness in the world, because, I really don't see any remnants of COVID anywhere anymore. So anyway, I would really be open to hearing people's opinions. So hit me up. Let me know what you think. Call a spade a spade. Talk to you soon.
The ending was terrific.
This episode was brought to you by the new book, Deep Shallow Dive Into You, available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in hardcover and paperback. Don't forget to sign up for our new mailing list on our website at deepshallowdive.com.